Thanks, Erin, for that intro. I need to clarify, I do really enjoy things that smell good. Candles, perfume, I'm just like, yes, great food. I don't want to limit, the options. So I always like to put that in there. And then I always like to mention that I am also very, very normal, chill. I got a Costco card a couple years ago, feeling on top of the world. So it's my journey into adulting here. But thank you for having me. I'm so excited. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what a legacy, what a celebration to have this day every year to reflect on his legacy, and not just the great orator that he was, the great speaker, the great preacher, but also that he was a father, that he was a son, that he was a husband, that he was a really good pool player, apparently. It's like, you feel free to follow me on social media, but Bernice King always posts the best pictures of him. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know he played pool. But of course he played pool, riding his bike, all of those things. The humanity of Dr. King.
I have not done the steps.
Yes, it's great to see him there. So thanks again for having me. I come from, I'm living in Los Angeles, which is the land of the Chumash, the Tongva, the Kizh, and the Tatiavam. And I like to start with that because I'm muted there, but I am on native land, I am on stolen land, and I really want to name that to ground us as we begin today. And as I was thinking about what to talk about, I always like to ground myself in some quotes. And now I need to add this one that was just mentioned here around just remembering our humanity, because I love talking about that. But I think about James Baldwin, who talks about not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I think about Bernie Glassman, which is actually a Buddhist and Zen leader, but talks about bearing witness, which we'll be talking about today, and what it means to bear witness and to get into the situation as we're bearing witness. And then not to mention the late, great Dr. King. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality, which is one of my favorite quotes that he talked about actually as he was accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. And he mentions that prior to that, he's talking about, I do not feel that nations need to go into destruction, but that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. And that it is more important to fight with righteousness and to get the righteousness versus letting ourselves succumb to evil, even if it seems overwhelming. And I think that hits really on, Dr. King's words of hope. And I'm excited to be here with you all. And obviously, I'm going to talk about bearing witness. And what does that mean? What does it mean to bear witness? And my friend Merriam-Webster always talks about bearing witness being to show that something exists or is true. And then if you do just a random Google search, you get all these other things, acknowledging that something exists or is true, showing signs that something happened, telling what you have seen. And then in the Buddhist realm, it talks about, again, becoming the situation, understanding with so much empathy what is going on. And so I think about, as someone who grew up in the church, being a biblical witness, we're bearing truth of who God is. We think about the criminal legal system. A witness is someone who talks about their understanding of the crime or their understanding of a person that is being told that they've committed a crime. And so as we think about witnessing, there's so much power in what it means to bear witness. But I want to name that it is active. I want to name that it's ongoing. I want to name that it's not as simple as I'm about to break it down to. It takes time, it takes work. And I honestly believe that it is actually the first step in racial reconciliation, the first step in racial justice. Because if we are not able to talk about something existing, to holistically look at the situation, to claim that something is true, then we cannot move forward in trying to change it. So the question becomes, if that is the first step, how can we bear witness? And I think it is, again, difficult, but I'm going to try to simplify it for us based just on things that I have done in the past. I work at a small firm now doing diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for basically corporate America, universities, and nonprofits and everything in between. Prior to that, I worked at a school, and prior to that, I worked at Network. But one of the things when I was in the realm of education was I began to just collect all of the things that I had read. I got some friends to join me in this process, and that is how Anti-Racism Resource Guide started. It's just a guide of a ton of resources you can look at. You can check it out online. But that did not begin without bearing witness to what I thought needed to happen. And so one of the things when we're bearing witness is we need to be open. We need to be open. We need to be aware to our surroundings. We need to be mindful of what I call the 3 Ps. We need to be mindful of our proximity. We need to be mindful of our power. We need to be mindful of our privilege as we enter into spaces. We need to be seeking opportunities to gain awareness and understanding. And I think a lot of times people might attribute, oh, I need to go and make a new friend and I need to do this. That's part of it. We want to continue to get to know people who are different from us. People who might be similar in some ways and different in others. But there's a deeper level of, if those folks are not around, how are we still bearing witness to some of these other things? And I'm thankful to live in a very, very racially diverse area right now, but I have not always. And so one of the things that I have had to do is be open, not only to people, but to stories. And I think about art a lot in this, whether it's a book, a movie, a podcast, a picture, a painting. There are so many ways to bear witness to the stories of others. And so really being open to any of those opportunities that we see. The next part, I think, of bearing witness really talks about being present. And this is one of the hardest parts for me, because I like to read something and then give my own info into it. Or I talk with someone and I'm like, oh, let me tell you about what I think, or is this really true? But being present is not only intentional and meaningful, it comes from this place of emptiness, where we are mentally and physically surrendering what we think, our inputs, our biases, what we think should be the outcome, our solutions, and we are just deep listening to the stories, whether you're reading about it, whether you're talking about it. And we're holding space in those moments without expectation. And this is where things sometimes get convoluted, things around saviorism, things around, we think we're solving problems and we're actually, we talk a lot about intent versus impact. The intent is one way, but the impact turns out so differently. And really being mindful of that impact piece, because that's the part that we really want to get right to honor the humanity of others. And so I think this be present piece is just so ingrained, not only in choosing to love, but really, really, really honoring the humanity of another person and their story and what they're saying, not just what we think they're saying. And then this last part, which sometimes we jump to without doing this be present part, is being active. And this can look a lot of different ways. Sometimes it is standing with someone in a protest. Sometimes it does mean opening up your wallet to organizations that are doing the work. But there's this idea of serving the situation, of understanding that there is something that is not right, something that needs to be made right, right? When we talk about racial justice and when we talk specifically about injustice. But how can we serve the situation? And this sometimes may mean that we may need to get involved in one way, but it sometimes may mean we need to take the lead of someone else. And so as we serve the situation, it's also looking at embracing and recognizing it in whole, in its entirety. This is where we think about things like systemic racism. When we think about things like, it is not just what we see in front of us. There's a system at play here. There's things that are happening that we want to be a part of. I used to work at a school, and one of the things that I did at the school was I helped students who are first generation college bound as myself get into colleges. And it's a wide range of GPAs, a wide range of financial spaces and places. And as students were applying to school, we began to see trends. We began to see there were students that because of their names, they were asked to do more things. Whether it be FAFSA verification or any of these other things. I'm not going to bore you with all the higher ed lingo, but it was very, very interesting to understand that it wasn't just, you know, my friend Antonia who was applying to college. It was that Antonia was being put in a system that is very, very complicated and was not built for her to be successful on the other side. And not just not successful her first year, but the program I worked with was one that supported her year after year, because we noticed that students would make it through their first year, especially first generation students, mostly Black and brown, and then they would all of a sudden they're not able to go through. And we're like, you're at the school, you were doing great, you got really great grades the first year, what's going on? And really understanding some of the systems and what were the tools that we could equip students with in high school to help them navigate those systems in college. But it was a whole thing. It was not just Antonia not knowing how to fill out the FAFSA at that time. It was way more than that was contributing to her having a hard time in college. And so it's so imperative that we continue to look at holistic situations in an effort to serve that situation. And the last thing I want to say about being active is around this expression of our empathy. That is what this is, right? Like we talk about loving our neighbor in the church, which I've kind of changed to honoring the humanity of others, because I think there's been a very big mix up on what it looks like to love your neighbor. But how do we honor our neighbor? How do we honor someone else and their humanity? Not just who they are or who we think they could be, but their humanity in that moment. And so really understanding that that is what bearing witness means, to be open to meeting them, to be present in that meeting, and then to be active serving that situation. I'm excited for the day. I'm excited for what is to come, and I'm excited for being on a journey bearing witness. Thanks so much.
And with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions for Tasha. Go ahead and raise your hand. Kim, are you able to unmute people? Great. I'll get the ball rolling, Tasha.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tasha, as a woman of color that spent time in Chambersburg and then moving to multiple other areas of the country, where have you seen growth, and where do you still see a need for growth in Franklin County specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see how long we have. You know, I think, well, one, this group did not exist when I lived there. So let's start there. And I think I don't even know how to start with this. I am not who I was when I lived in Chambersburg. I think that I have come into my own identity a lot more, and embracing being Black, being Latinx. I think that I just wasn't at this level for multiple reasons. I think I have been on a journey, but I do think that as it relates to proximity, I think the people that were in proximity to me loved me very, very well. Just generally speaking, obviously Franklin County, majority white, but like people just loved me really well. I think part of that was because I was at Network, but the folks that I interacted with just loved me really well. And that that was very different. I went to Shippensburg, and so I knew the area when I was coming to Chambersburg. But I think I was not expecting that, which really did give me space to be who I was at that time. But then thinking about leaving, and I moved actually to Pittsburgh, which has been named one of the worst places for Black women, actually. And then moving to Columbus and now living in Los Angeles, I think this group was so necessary even when I lived there. And I think that there has been, I have been following the news. I've been following the news in Franklin County. So I do think that there is a lot more, because of the state of the country, that is seen very evidently in Franklin County. But when I look at the folks in this group and I look at this group exists, there is this undertone of movement, right? Not just embracing the moments that have happened, but in a movement that is happening when folks are really understanding, excuse me, what it means to love their neighbor, what it means to honor the humanity of others. And even just at that level, let alone then going to that active space and serving the situation and not just saying, you know, I'm going to love Tasha well, but there's a whole community of folks that has a different story from me. What are the ways that we can serve that community? Whether it's the Black community or other historically marginalized communities, whether it's the unhoused. Like, I just think there is going from that being near someone to then that active piece is something that still needs to work on, not just in Franklin County, just overall. I mean, Los Angeles is so much work obviously needs to be done here as well. And so thinking about those ways, how can we move? Brian Stevenson talks about proximity a lot. How can we move from that one person that we've gotten to know that we love into something that is looking at the whole situation? So that's a great question. I could say so much, but I also am going to say that I was not in a space where I would have been even, I think, ready to join a group like Racial Reconciliation when I lived in Chambersburg. I think that came a lot later. So it's a great question. Let's see what we've got in here. I also want to comment on what Clint said. I am an early riser. So when I agreed to do this, I knew that 6 a.m. was early, but I've been up for about a couple hours. So I appreciate that sentiment. CJ, who are some of your favorite people to follow and learn from? Oh boy, this is a great question. I think that one of the things that happened when I started the, we call it ARG or the guide, but when I started Anti-Racism Resource Guide, is that it came out of a bunch of people just asking me, what are you reading right now? We were, you know, it was in the midst of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, all being murdered. And people were really like, I want my classroom to be more equitable. I worked at a school that was predominantly taught by majority culture, and then predominantly the students were brown and Black. And so it created dynamics, especially of power in the classroom. And so that was something that we immediately started talking about. And I had a bunch of teachers on board. And so they kept asking me, what are you reading now? What are you reading now? Do you have any resources for this? And I was like, I'm kind of getting tired of answering all your questions because we all have Google. But then thinking about the reason that I had been reading things is because I had been asking other people about that. And so that's kind of how the guide came to fruition, of just starting to list things. Friends joined in because I needed more resources. All of the resources on there have been vetted. There will be new ones to come on there shortly. But just understanding that learning from others helps us in our journey. It's not the whole journey. Education is a piece of that journey, right? There's a lot of things that need to happen in person, a lot of things that need to happen when we're present and when we're active. But I have learned to answer this question from so many people. One of my favorite people right now, and is on top of my mind because I just finished her new book that'll be coming out in February, is Lisa Sharon Harper. For those of you that are believers, she is a preacher in Seattle. She's wonderful. She's great. Definitely someone to follow. I think someone who really, really speaks to what it means to love our neighbor, what that looks like right now. Another person that I have been following for a while. And when I moved here, I had all my friends read her book before they conversed with me, is Austin Channing Brown. She wrote a book called I'm Still Here. And it's a wonderful book. I recommend reading it, especially if you're looking like in a workplace and your workplace has been talking about microaggressions. I use this sometime in my trainings. There's a whole section on her actually going to a Christian organization and the microaggression she experiences throughout the day. Wonderful read, very short read as well. I think some folks in this group might have done a book study on that as well. James Baldwin, I'm working through reading all of James Baldwin's books right now, and then we'll be actually switching to Bell Hooks shortly here because I'm almost done with that. And then I think if you follow me on social media at all, I post a lot of things from other folks. So that's another, I could just list people all day. The one thing that I always recommend to folks is Anti-Racism Daily, which actually sends you a daily email about just a topic. Sometimes it's on topic for what's going on and what's in the news. Sometimes it's about something that needs to be brought back up. And so I really love that because it gives you resources. It's usually written by someone on their fairly diverse team. And then it also gives you actions. So definitely recommend following and supporting them. Great crew there. Yeah, but I could list people today, but those are my main ones right now.
Thank you. CJ also wants to know, and we all want to know, do you have a Venmo or a PayPal account where we can support you?
Yes, all the same. The guide has a Patreon and a cool, love new followers on IG. The guide has a Patreon and all that stuff you can find on the website. And then me personally, again, all tater tosh, kind of keep it simple. When I was in college, actually, I really liked tater tots. They also smell good. And my friend's like, what about tater tosh? And I was like, that's great. So nothing really creative there other than I've just kept it because I love it. I have a question from Marvin here. What do we need to become in order to do this work? And this is, oh, what a good question. What do we need to become in order to do this work? And I would say the same question goes for what do we need to become to bear witness? And I think one of the big things that I have learned, not only moving from Franklin County and moving around, is we need to know who we are. And that's not just like, oh, I'm Tasha and I love this and this, but also what do we bring into spaces and places? I talk about proximity, power, and privilege a lot and how we hold that. But that is something that is a journey that needs to be started on. I think it changes over time. I got my master's degree not too long ago. That changes the privilege that I have in the United States and beyond, actually. But when we think about those three things, it's a constant ongoing piece of our journey to acknowledge how are we in proximity to others? Who are we in proximity to? What kind of power do we possess? Not just generally speaking, right? Visible power, things like that, but also in different spaces, I hold more power. And so what does that mean? And what does that look like? And then what types of privileges do I have based on my age, based on where I live, based on all of these different things, and continuing to go back to that. I think that's one big thing. We need to become someone who knows ourselves. I think there's an honesty there and there's a humility there. To know that we don't know everything. And I think that is the space to be in, that, we talk about this learn, unlearn, relearn cycle. And what do you do? One of the questions I ask myself all the time, what do we do when we get information that's different from what we know or what we have known? What do we do with that? Because that really determines how we move through racial justice, how we move through justice generally, when we're up against something that is different from what we have known. And so some of this comes with time, but what are the spaces that we can be in where we're humble, we're learning about ourselves, but we're also willing to be open to what is being said. And so I think that can get easier in some spaces and harder in others, for sure, especially working in corporate America. There's just a lot of these dynamics, and being able to name them, being able to name power, being able to name how that plays into the entire life cycle of an employee, all of those different things is really, really important. So, but definitely becoming just more humble as we're learning. The more I learn, the more I realize I know a lot less than I thought I did when I started out on this journey. And that there is no historically marginalized community that is a monolith. And so I've had to learn around my own anti-Blackness, my own spaces where I'm like, well, that can't be right, or this isn't that, or that person can't do that. And really coming, you know, when we talk about that, surrendering to the situation to learn, and really coming in just humble and ready to learn, just learn. Not really give any tidbits of information. That's a great question. I could talk about that one all day too, because I think it changes from time to time, but I think it's important to continue to be on that journey. And really, you know, I should have talked about this a little bit with bearing witness, but I talk with people about picking something, because racial reconciliation and all of justice work is very, very overwhelming, just generally speaking. There's a lot to tackle. When we talk about the levels, we talk about situations. I could just talk about, right, like Jim Crow era and how that continues today. I could talk about that forever, but there's all these pieces in there: voting rights, education rights, mass incarceration. And so I always encourage people to pick something. I had picked education because I was teaching, and I was in that space, and I knew there were a lot of places where education had been, that there needed to be reconciliation in education. Obviously there still does. There's a lot of work there. From preschool and who gets to go to preschool all the way up through higher education, and just the inaccessibility there for certain people. And then now that I am in corporate America, it is a lot more focused on what are the from the boardroom to the newsletter, what are the ways that those spaces can be more equitable? Even if the CEO is not looking to be on a DEI journey, right? Like, what does that look like? But my encouragement to you all, and part of this becoming something, is to really just pick something, maybe something you're already passionate about. There's a lot of inequity in sports if you're passionate about sports. There's a lot of inequity in businesses if you're talking about small businesses and which businesses we shop and all of those different things. And really picking something to start with so that it is less overwhelming. And you might just want to stay there, which is totally okay. But I think we all do this work very differently, but really, really understanding and honing in as we go through our proximity and our power and our privilege. Like, what are we passionate about? What are we already doing, right? One of the things I talk about with companies is like, we're not here to do something new. We're here to do something better. And so you are already interacting with people. How can we do that better? You are already apparently loving your neighbor, but how can we do that better? How can your meetings get more inclusive? How can the spaces you're in be more inclusive, more welcoming, creating space for folks to be fully present, to validate their stories, and all of those different types of things. So some of this is in your interactions that you are having, finding places to do that. Instead of going out and trying to find something new, because people are right here with us now, and it's important to honor their humanity and bear witness to their stories.
Yeah, man. Oh, Tasha, we're just so grateful for you. I know that you have other questions for Tasha, and I see them coming in. Please, Tasha, would it be okay for me to invite people to message you on your social media or on, on his chat?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, great. Please continue to be in conversation with Tasha. We're going to move forward on this program. Yeah, and we're just so grateful for you. Thank you.